Good evening, ghouls, and welcome to today's little story. It's quite a short one today, and we're still continuing our series doing stories from different places or different cultures, different time periods every day. But today is English Day. It's a little bit of a cheat, but what I wanted to do is just share with you something that we don't necessarily have time to talk about that much tomorrow, but is an important part of the early history of the Gothic. And it's a short fragment, so it's called, by Anna Letitia Barbauld, where Anna Letitia Aiken, as was, and her brother John Aiken wrote together a combined essay on the pleasure to be derived from objects of terror and this fragment, Sir Bertrand. This practice of writing fragments sort of came to the fore a little bit more at the end of the 18th century. And what it is basically a fictional demonstration of the ideas that they were putting forward in the essay. And in the essay, they described sort of the appeal, as it were, of terror. And they picked up on different things, such as curiosity being key, a safe curiosity, a safe sort of thrill. What we might think of now as sort of a bit of an adrenaline junkie issue going on, but from the safety of your own home. But curiosity, as I say, was one of the main things, and they differentiated between supernatural terror, as it were, and more natural horror. Although they didn't use those terms terror and horror to differentiate, we can see that differentiation in and among, I would say, that becomes later formalized, obviously, in the work of Anne Radcliffe, who differentiated between terror and horror using those terms. Now, Anne Radcliffe differentiated between terror as something that expands the mind, causes it to open up and question what lies beyond, basically, whereas horror just freezes the blood and stops you short. Now, in the essay by the Aikens, you have a very similar distinction going on, but it's related to supernatural terror versus natural horror. And what they suggest is that there are two main forms of terror. That which comes from the horrible, from the worldly, such as finding a murdered body. And they stress that the effect of that is very different than, for example, encountering a supernatural being, where there is a sense of an openness to that encounter, an openness of uncertainty. Anyway, what we're going to see in this fragment is an exemplification of this in fiction, where you encounter multiple different forms of terror, horror, supernatural terror, natural terror, whatever the terms are that we're using. And hopefully you'll enjoy it. It's a little bit open-ended, of course, because it's a fragment, but it does rather suck you in, I've always thought. In terms of if you're trying to sort of work out where this falls in the history of the Gothic, it was written in 1773. So that's 9 years after the publication of Castle of Otranto. So you really are seeing it in the early period of the Gothic. And part of that apparatus which provided the justification for the Gothic, in a sense, at a philosophical level. Ellipses. After this adventure, Sir Bertrand turned his steed towards the north, hoping to cross these dreary moors before the curfew. But ere he had proceeded half his journey, he was bewildered by the different tracks, and not being able, as far as the eye could reach, to espy any object but the brown heath surrounding him, he was at length quite uncertain which way he should direct his course. Night overtook him in this situation. It was one of those nights when the moon gives a faint glimmering of light through the thick black clouds of a lowering sky. Now and then she suddenly emerged in full splendour from her veil, and then instantly retired behind it, having just served to give the forlorn Sir Bertrand a wide extended prospect over the desolate waste. Hope and native courage a while urged him to push forwards, but at length the increasing darkness and fatigue of body and mind overcame him. He dreaded moving from the ground he stood on for fear of unknown pits and bogs, and alighting from his horse in despair, he threw himself on the ground. He had not long continued in that posture when the sullen toll of a distant bell struck his ears. He started up, and turning towards the sound, discerned a dim, twinkling light. Instantly, he seized his horse's bridle and with cautious steps advanced towards it. After a painful march, he was stopped by a moated ditch surrounding the place from whence the light proceeded, and by a momentary glimpse of moonlight, he had a full view of a large antique mansion with turrets at the corners and an ample porch in the centre. The injuries of time were strongly marked on everything about it. The roof in various places was fallen in, the battlements were half demolished, and the windows broken and dismantled. A drawbridge with a ruinous gateway at each end led to the court before the building. He entered, and instantly the light which proceeded from a window in one of the turrets glided along and vanished. At the same moment the moon sunk beneath a black cloud, and the night was darker than ever. All was silent. Sir Bertrand fastened his steed under a shed, and approaching the house, traversed its whole front with light and slow footsteps. All was still as death. He looked in at the lower windows, but could not distinguish a single object through the impenetrable gloom. After a short parley with himself, he entered the porch, and seizing a massy iron knocker at the gate, lifted it up, and hesitating, at length struck a loud stroke. The noise resounded through the whole mansion with hollow echoes. All was still again. He repeated the strokes, more boldly and louder. Another interval of silence ensued. A third time he knocked, and a third time all was still. He then fell back to some distance that he might discern whether any light could be seen in the whole front. It again appeared in the same place, and quickly glided away as before. At the same instant, a deep, sullen toll sounded from the turret. Sir Bertrand's heart made a fearful stop. He was a while motionless. Then terror impelled him to make some hasty steps towards his steed, but shame stopped his flight. And urged by honour and a resistless desire of finishing the adventure, he returned to the porch. Working up his soul to a full readiness of resolution, he drew forth his sword with one hand, and with the other lifted up the latch of the gate. The heavy door, creaking upon its hinges, reluctantly yielded to his hand. He applied his shoulder to it and forced it open. He quitted it and stepped forward. The door instantly shut with a thundering clap. Sir Bertrand's blood was chilled. He turned back to find the door, and it was long ere his trembling hands could seize it, but his utmost strength could not open it again. After several ineffectual attempts, he looked behind him, and beheld across a hall upon a large staircase a pale bluish flame, which cast a dismal gleam of light around. He again summoned forth his courage and advanced towards it. It retired. He came to the foot of the stairs, and after a moment's deliberation ascended. He went slowly up, the flame retiring before him till he came to a wide gallery. The flame proceeded along it, and he followed in silent horror, treading lightly, for the echoes of his footsteps startled him. It led him to the foot of another staircase, and then vanished. At the same instant, another toll sounded from the turret, and Sir Bertrand felt it strike upon his heart. He was now in total darkness, and with his arms extended began to ascend the second staircase. A dead, cold hand met his left hand and firmly grasped it, drawing him forcibly forwards. He endeavoured to disengage himself, but could not. He made a furious blow with his sword, and instantly a loud shriek pierced his ears, and the dead hand was left powerless in his. He dropped it, and rushed forwards with a desperate valour. The stairs were narrow and winding, and interrupted by frequent breaches and loose fragments of stone. The staircase grew narrower, and at length terminated in a low iron grate. Sir Bertrand pushed it open. It led to an intricate winding passage, just large enough to admit a person on his hands and knees. A faint glimmering of light served to show the nature of the place. Sir Bertrand entered. A deep, hollow groan resounded from a distance through the vault. He went forwards, and proceeding beyond the first turning, he discerned the same blue flame which had before conducted him. He followed it. The vault at length suddenly opened into a lofty gallery, in the midst of which a figure appeared, completely armed, thrusting forwards the bloody stump of an arm, with a terrible frown and menacing gesture, and brandishing a sword in his hand. Sir Bertrand undauntedly sprung forwards, and aiming a fierce blow at the figure, it instantly vanished, letting fall a massy iron key. The flame now rested upon a pair of ample folding doors at the end of the gallery. Sir Bertrand went up to it, and applied the key to a brazen lock, With difficulty, he turned the bolt, and instantly the doors flew open, and discovered a large apartment at the end of which was a coffin rested upon a bier, with a taper burning on each side of it. Along the room on both sides were gigantic statues of black marble, attired in the Moorish habit, and holding enormous sabres in their right hands. Each of them reared his arm and advanced one leg forwards as the knight entered. At the same moment, the lid of the coffin flew open, and the bell tolled. The flames still glided forwards, and Sir Bertrand resolutely followed, till he arrived within 6 paces of the coffin. Suddenly, a lady in a shroud and black veil rose up in it, and stretched out her arms towards him. At the same time, the statues clashed their sabres and advanced. Sir Bertrand flew to the lady, and clasped her in his arms. She threw up her veil and kissed his lips, and instantly the whole building shook as with an earthquake, and fell asunder with a horrible crash. Sir Bertrand was thrown into a sudden trance, and on recovering, found himself seated on a velvet sofa in the most magnificent room he had ever seen, lighted with innumerable tapers in lustres of pure crystal. A sumptuous banquet was set in the middle. The doors opening to soft music, a lady of incomparable beauty, attired with amazing splendour, entered, surrounded by a troop of gay nymphs more fair than the Graces. She advanced to the knight, and falling on her knees, thanked him as her deliverer. The nymphs placed a garland of laurel upon his head, and the lady led him by the hand to the banquet and sat beside him. The nymphs placed themselves at the table, and a numerous train of servants entering served up the feast, delicious music playing all the time. Sir Bertrand could not speak for astonishment. He could only return their honours by courteous looks and gestures. After the banquet was finished, all retired, but the lady, who, leading back the knight to the sofa, addressed him in these words. Told you it was a fragment, that's where it ends. Apologies. I would be so interested if anybody is watching this that's like a writer and would like to finish it. I would be so interested to see where people took the story from here. It's really interesting to me that some of these things that seem almost sort of banal elements of many ghost stories now, over-repeated tropes that have been done to death, we're really finding them here, one of the earliest times. So, for example, the door that closes behind you. I love that image of the blue flame, which he inexplicably keeps following, and also inexplicably kisses the lady when he's about to be attacked by a load of marble statues. But, that's Gothic logic for you, isn't it? Anyway, hopefully you can see from it sort of some of the different types of terror that the story is attempting to elicit, with a real emphasis on that kind of supernatural terror and that entrance into a world that you simply just don't really understand, which is part of the essence of the Gothic, I think. Uncertainty, confusion. There's a certain oniric nature to the event. It does read like a dream, doesn't it? Or you're just sort of going from bit to bit, following the inevitable, as it were. Anyway, I hope you enjoy. Please do finish it. I would love it if you got in contact with me in the comments below, or through my Twitter page at @romgothsam. Because this is a YouTube video, please like and subscribe. I don't know what that does, but sure, let's go for it. Anyway, good night, ghouls, and I will see you tomorrow.